Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation discussing the top 5 reasons it's time to explore hybrid cloud backup. In a moment, I'll be introducing today's speakers, ESG Senior Analyst Jason Buffington and InfraScale CEO Ken Shaw. But first, we have a couple of quick announcements. So first, you will be receiving a copy of today's webinar within 24 hours. You'll be getting that via email to the email address that you provided when you registered. You can also view the replay video in the Resources tab of the InfraScale website. Also, GoToWebinar has a questions tool where you can get involved in the Q&A portion after the presentation. So please use this tool to ask questions throughout the presentation, and the participant with the most relevant questions is going to be winning a free Kindle today. So definitely get involved. Now let me go ahead and introduce today's speakers. We have on the line with us today Jason Buffington, Senior Analyst at ESG, and Jason focuses primarily on data protection along with Windows Server infrastructure management and virtualization. Also presenting is Ken Shaw, InfraScale founder and CEO. For the past 12 years, Mr. Shaw has founded and operated several software companies focused on building massively scalable cloud storage systems for backup, archiving, and collaboration. Now I'll pass it to Jason.
Thanks so much. So my name is Jason Buffington, as mentioned. I've been in data protection for quite a while, and so what InfraScale asked me to talk about today is to share with you what is moving the data protection market. What are the primary driving factors that we're seeing in market today? And then because I've been a data protection practitioner for most of my career, I really want to give you some ideas of what I think you should be looking for as part of modernizing an overall data protection strategy. Then I'm going to turn it over to my friend Ken. He has some thoughts on the topic as well. And then I'll be back with you for some shared Q&A at the end. And again, looking forward to seeing that Q&A come in through the Q&A tool as well, and we'll cover those as best we can. So every analyst firm has its own way of trying to figure out, what does the future hold? What are people really thinking about? My pastor used to tell me, if you really want to know what somebody's priorities are, look in their checkbook. How do they spend their money? How do they spend their time? And so we do that at ESG every year in November, December of each year. We ask folks, what are you planning on spending money on next year? And so with that in mind, here's the 2015 set of priorities for the year. And you can see that certainly by a long shot, information security is on the top of that list. And in fact, it's been that way this year and last year, I think in large part due to some of the vulnerabilities of the world that we live in. Certainly Sony didn't help a couple months ago, but take a look at some of the yellow boxes on there. We've also seen improving data backup and recovery be a top 5 priority or actually top 3 priority for the last 4 years running. Also, by the way, not only is the tactical side of improving data backup and recovery in the list, but so is the more strategic aspects of business continuity and disaster recovery preparation as well. And what you also notice, along with the yellow boxes, which are, of course, near and dear to my heart, and probably many of you that are on the phone today, I would also offer that many of the things that are highlighted in orange, managing unstructured data growth, increasing use of server virtualization, increasing use of cloud infrastructure, regulatory compliance initiatives. In fact, I could probably even also argue building a private cloud infrastructure and collaboration. All of those things where you are modernizing some aspect of your production infrastructure are key, because arguably, if you're not modernizing protection at the same rate that you're modernizing production, what you will eventually find is that your production systems have outgrown your legacy approaches for data protection. And so I think of really a lot of those as not only being modernization vectors on their own and certainly meritorious priorities, but also they're probably the primary drivers affecting why people are trying to improve their data backup and recovery, and why they're able to think about improving their business continuity disaster recovery preparation, because of how those other things are kind of coming together. Now, this particular set of priorities is the top 10 across the whole industry. If I look at, say, just mid-sized organizations, just smaller orgs, say 100 to 999 as a user size base, we again see backup and recovery in the number 2 slot. We again see data growth and server virtualization as being primary drivers, and that's why they're adjacent to that. And then BCDR preparation is even higher in that list. And In this case, I think that's arguably because we see that when, for mid-sized organizations that before always wanted to have BCDR but never thought it was viable, now we start to see how virtualization makes things portable, cloud makes things economic. All of a sudden, BCDR becomes attainable for the first time. So my point here is there's a lot of things driving the fact that modernizing data protection is a high priority for folks of all sizes. And so what I'd like to do now is, hopefully, if this resonates with you, is give you some ideas of what we believe, having looked at pretty much everything in the industry and asking several hundred of you, where do you think data protection should be going? What are you planning on doing? So let me offer you a couple ideas. First and foremost, you should be planning for a hybrid architecture. And the soundbite for that is because disk isn't everything. Now, hybrid means different things to different people. We could talk about hybrid from a physical plus virtual. We could talk about it from even within virtual, a multi-hypervisor type architecture. But in this case, what I really want to make sure that you also think about is that you should be planning for a solution that's more where disk is not the only form of media that's going to be in your data protection arsenal. Now, let me be very clear here. These circles are not drawn to scale. If they were, it'd look more like an upside-down Mickey Mouse kind of head, because certainly I believe that disk is the core of every data protection strategy. So that should be significantly larger, and I'll talk more about why that is starting on my next slide. But also be planning for some tape is likely part of your equation if you're going to be doing a lot of long-term regulatory compliance-based data preservation. And then certainly you cannot have an IT modernization conversation today without talking about cloud. And arguably, I would imagine that as time goes on and we go into 2016 and 2017, not only are these circles not drawn to scale today, there's certainly a lot of environments that I would expect to see the tape circle continue to shrink a little bit, not to zero, but shrink. And certainly we'll see the cloud circle expand as cloud becomes more and more mainstream, and the idea of hybrid becomes not just something that people aspire to, but something that really is understood as the commonplace mainstream of where data protection is going as a disk plus cloud architecture coupled with tape where long-term regulatory-based long-term retention is required. So that's what a hybrid looks like. Again, circles not to scale. But as I mentioned, one of the things that you should really be thinking about is disk for a fast local restore because your SLAs mandate that. And let me kind of break that down for you. What I'm saying is that, and I believe the last set of data we looked at a couple months ago said 96% of you are using disk as your first tier of recovery, and that should not change, except for maybe the 4% of you that aren't yet. And the reason I say that is because when we really start looking at what the requirements are for recovery agility, it's really hard to pull that off without some kind of a local disk-based or disk-centered solution along the way. One data point to kind of support that is the idea of when we asked folks last year, we said, you know, what's your tolerance for downtime? Now, it used to be in many older environments, we'll still think about things as Tier 1 applications, Tier 2 applications, Tier 3 applications. And frankly, in the years that we've been running this research, what we really found over the last couple is that Tier 1 applications and Tier 2 applications have SLAs that are nearly identical. Tier 2 may be a little bit to the right, but that's about it. And then Tier 3 is everything else. So we kind of bundled that up a little bit. So now we just look at high priority applications, and then I'll share with you what the normal application downtime tolerance windows look like in just a second. But in this case, when we look at high priority applications, those applications that historically you've done whatever heroic measures were necessary, what we see is that 50% of those applications, 49 actually, have a downtime tolerance window of 15 minutes or less. And in fact, if we look at even a 3-hour window, something where backup could actually be part of that solution, we see a downtime tolerance window of 83%, 7 out of 8 have a tolerance of 3 hours or less for that. Now, you would expect that for Tier 1 applications or high priority apps. When I look at, say, normal applications, everything else in your environment, we see that 1/4 of the normal applications have that same recovery objective of 15 minutes or less. 62%, 5 out of 8 normal applications have that same 3 hours or less. And again, my point here is even when we start putting this together, what you're hopefully seeing is the idea of doing anything other than a disk-centric on-premise powered solution is going to be really hard to meet those SLAs. which is why we recommend that while the hybrid solution is certainly going to be there, you should really be thinking first and foremost about disk, because that's going to give you certainly your fastest backup ingest. So that means your backup window is going to be shorter. That's going to give you the most effective deduplication options available, and certainly that's going to give you additional agility around flexibility of restore, including instant VM boot, granular restores from those bulk backups, etc. So plan for disk being part of the solution that you're going to entail. Now, that being said, as we mentioned before, disk is not everything. And so what I'd offer to you is that while disk is going to be the core of that solution really needs to, for most everyone, need to have some kind of a data survivability scenario as well, because bad stuff happens on site. And for an ever-increasing growing percentage of the population, we're seeing cloud as being a big part of that approach. Now, that's not just from a technology perspective, it's also just from a straight operational agility perspective. Now, when we ask folks, what's driving your overall IT spending in general? So take all the technology aside. Why and how are you making your big IT decisions in 2015? One of the things we think is most interesting, certainly just like security information initiatives was the technical priority on the earlier data, certainly showing security and risk management as a high priority from a business initiative perspective makes sense. And certainly I would tell you, when we say security and risk management, having a reliable data protection strategy absolutely falls into that, into one definition of risk management. So certainly we see that as a top-line initiative. And then along the same lines, we see regulatory compliance in the top 5 as well. So data protection is certainly part of that. But even if you take the IT parts away, the thing which is really driving business is the idea of, okay, protect the data, ensure it's there, but then right behind that, how do I do it cheaper? So cost reduction initiatives is certainly a big part of that as well. And in fact, if I were to double click into that and say, okay, so cost reduction is important, how are you going to reduce costs along the way? When I find that out, so one of my cost containment measures, historically, even 2013 and before, when we ask folks, how are you going to contain costs? What we hear them say is, well, I'm going to postpone, I'm going to cancel projects, I'm going to freeze headcount. Basically, I'm going to slow down. That's actually not the case anymore. You know, no one ever got ahead by slowing down, fundamentally speaking. Instead, what we see now, and we saw it in 2014, we see it again in the 2015 version of that data, you know, the top 3 reasons or methods of how people are going to contain costs is, one, they're going to renegotiate contracts, right? So they're going to keep doing what they're doing right now, but they want to do it cheaper. But take a look at the next 2. They're going to increase use of cloud computing as an alternative in-house application infrastructure, and this is interesting, they're going to purchase new technologies that improve overall ROI. What I would tell you is that all 3 of those really can be distilled down as you want to do IT smarter, right? You're willing to either do what you're doing now but try to do it for less. You're certainly going to embrace cloud because of the architectural benefits that come out of that and changing from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. And again, you're interested in buying new technologies that will deliver a better ROI, not just trading CapEx for OpEx, but actually reducing the bottom line in net sum savings. So we know that driving business agility is based on reducing costs is a big one. We ask how are you trying to do IT smarter? And in fact, when we look at how cloud figures in that list, because again, a lot of what we're talking about today is hybrid, when we've asked that same question for the last 7 years, we've seen that cloud continues to rise as part of that model along the way. So cloud is certainly today a mainstream alternative for that. All right, so let's double click into that. We know about business agility going into leveraging cloud as part of that. We've looked at cloud becoming more of a mainstream. When we ask folks, okay, what are you going to do with cloud? How is that going to? 2 of the top 3 scenarios of how people are planning on using the clouds as part of their data protection strategy. In fact, by the way, last year's data, backup was number 1 and disaster recovery is number 2. This year, number 2 and number 3 are transposed, but still 2 of the top 3 with backup certainly being the number 1 use case for cloud infrastructure as well. So now we've gotten down to the brass tacks of it. We know we're going to use disk. We know we're going to use cloud, and what this data tells us, what you told us, is the way that you're going to use cloud is by supplementing part of your data protection strategy. And that's where we find ourselves today, a hybrid architecture disk for fast restores, cloud for extended protection and survivability of data, focusing on reducing risk, and supplement. And not only were we talking about the traditional aspects of tactical backup and recovery, just can I get yesterday back because I'm down today, but also can I ensure that my business remains solvent moving forward? And to do that, that's a disk plus cloud scenario. So what I would offer to you is really, if disk plus cloud is the math, that still isn't a specific how. So here's a couple things you want to think about. Think about disk plus cloud as building blocks. Now, I have 3 kids, and so in my house, we got lots of Legos, building blocks. And I'm convinced, I haven't talked to anyone at Lego about this, but I'm convinced that when you get those little, you crack open that cardboard box and you see those plastic bags full of pieces, I pretty much believe that depending on which manual they stuck in that box, that little bag of pieces, you could build either an airplane from one manual, or you could build a race car on the other side. Maybe those are pretty extreme because you don't get propellers in the race car kit, but you get what I'm saying. Those pieces and parts can go together in different ways, and depending on how you put those pieces and parts together, you're going to get different kinds of agility to meet the kinds of recovery scenarios that your business is going to be looking for, and that should be, by the way, driven by the business, not driven by IT. In fact, when you look at how those building blocks come together, even arguably there's at least 2 big buckets of how that goes, and then you have to get into the pieces and parts and the details, every pun intended here. So for example, you could go with a true backup as a service kind of model. So the idea is we want to get your data to the cloud, and one way to do that, again, because of your SLAs, because of that downtime tolerance we talked about earlier, the way that you're going to do that is you're going to have some kind of a local cache which gives you that fast recovery, but again, your goal is get the data in the cloud. Right? Certainly, though, there's a lot of folks out there today that say, you know what, I've got an on-premise solution. And I like some of the pieces and parts of that on-premise solution, but I got to get better at it. I want to have an on-premise solution first and foremost, and then I'll extend to the cloud, right? That's an infrastructure as a service play that we talked about earlier. And so in this case, you're going to have a traditional backup architecture with agents and jobs that run to an on-premise solution as a lock, stock, and barrel, and then extend that to the cloud as a different way to go. Those are the methods. Right? Those are how the pieces and parts can come together. What I would offer to you is that as in 2015, one of the major trends that we're seeing is that instead of looking at just building blocks as a bag of pieces and parts, what you as IT decision makers have told us pretty consistently, in fact, we just published this month a report called Data Protection Appliances, looking at why is it that so many folks like those that are on the call today are so interested in buying pre-built solutions where the pieces and parts are right-sized, where you know the hardware and software is going to match, you know it's going to link up to the cloud service or the secondary functionality in a clean way. So there's a concept called data protection appliances. Now, there's some folks out there familiar with the term purpose-built backup appliance, and I would tell you, by the way, from my perspective, there's a difference between data protection appliances, DPAs, and purpose-built backup appliances, PBBAs, because what happened is, I don't know, 6, 8, 9 years ago, there's another analyst firm that said we should talk about PBBAs, and it was a great idea. The problem is that what the industry has come to today is that you take purpose-built backup appliances, what I just call a backup appliance, that's the red box in the upper left-hand corner, and then you start putting dedupe appliances in there and just calling those PBBAs also. And then there's some other kinds of boxes, and they threw those in there also. And basically, the PBBA bucket, the way some folks talk about it, is kind of like saying, okay, I'm going to take not only my apples and my oranges, but I'm going to throw in some cherries and some bananas, and what you really got is fruit salad. And that doesn't actually help you. It doesn't help you understand what it is you're trying to solve for, and then pick the kind of solution or the kind of feature set that will let you get where you want to go. And so I would offer to you, and by the way, there's a podcast link at the bottom of the screen that kind of talks through this. It's a bit.ly link, JB, ESG, that's where I work, DPA, Data Protection Appliance, right, and then the number 1 afterwards. But if you go and look at that, you'll see this little podcast that basically says, look, the first thing you need to understand is that there are backup appliances, those appliances that actually do backups. And then there's dedupe storage, which means that your backup is actually being done by something else, and you're just feeding it to a dedupe appliance. Now, that's not necessarily bad, but just let's be clear, they don't all do the same thing, right? turnkey solution versus fed by something else, where the only thing you're trying to solve for is efficiency. Now, that's the mainstream market that's out there today, but I would tell you that based on the hybrid architectures that we see folks looking for because of what your businesses are asking for in recovery, agility, and data survivability, I would tell you this is not what the whole market looks like. It's about half. You know, really what you want to think about is, okay, those are the traditional solutions, mainstream, available today. But what's really interesting is how the feature demands have exceeded what you can get out of just those two boxes alone. Instead, we're seeing newer appliances come into market where we see things around Cloud Gateway, where it's not just around, okay, I still need to be able to increase my efficiency, kind of like what the dedupe boxes used to do, but it's got to be cloud. I got to have that because I know that I need to change part of my CapEx model to OpEx, and I need to get data survivability along the way, and if I get to cloud, I can do that. And then certainly, in many cases, we see just backing up and being able to restore the data alone is not enough. What I really need is even faster agility than what a traditional restore might give me. So I'm really looking for more of a failover or a BCDR or whatever I can do to shrink my window of from recognition of outage to when I'm back and functioning again. Whatever I can do to shrink that recovery window or increase my business agility is really where this goes. Now, just to kind of finish out this picture here, a couple things that kind of help you understand why do these categories fit the way they do. Well, certainly the traditional categories, a lot of them actually are not even cloud extendable. Some of them are trying to get there as quick as they can because they know everybody on the right-hand side is cloud native. And frankly, if your solution isn't a cloud native solution, if it isn't wholly cloud extendable in a way that's not disruptive to your architecture, you're going to find that that's going to have some limits as far as how that can grow from a longevity perspective in your infrastructure. And then similarly, I would tell you that you know, if you're just looking at dedupe storage or if you're just looking at cloud gateway appliances, what that means is you are just trying to solve an efficiency claim. If you're really looking for something that's turnkey from a whole solution perspective and something that's really focused on the business requirements of recovery agility and not just I still got to feed it with something else, then you're really looking at something more in those top boxes. Now, to be fair, you know, just like the PBA categories that we saw from a couple years ago are kind of starting to morph, and so we really needed to redefine the industry in these new buckets. As what we're already starting to see is that as your businesses are asking for higher levels of agility, these black lines are not going to stay clean, and those colors are going to mix over time. You're going to start to see appliances, at least from innovative technologies, that are going to start to step over those lines and give some differentiation along the way by providing capabilities that would otherwise traditionally be part of one of the other quadrants. But the point is, first and foremost, understand what your solution ought to be looking for is Disk Plus Cloud. You should be looking for something that's going to reduce overall TCO and ROI, and then be thinking about what is it you're trying to solve for. Find yourself in that category and then look at what the other categories offer and then extend it that direction. That's how you're going to solve backup in 2015 and beyond. So with that, I think I'm just about out of my time, so I'm going to ask my friend Ken to come back on. Ken?
All right. Thank you, Jason. That was awesome. It's a true pleasure to have a real industry expert here at one of our webinars today. So building on what Jason just said, the idea that the lines here are blurring. What I'm about to do is introduce you to InfraScale. Many of you on the line may not be familiar with us, so sort of walk you through at a high level who we are, but then dig in really deep and look at our hybrid cloud backup solutions and how it interacts with this model that Jason's put forward. And so at a high level, InfraScale is working on building a complete data protection platform. So if I draw your eye to the top left-hand side of this diagram, it's kind of like Salesforce in concept, but one centralized, easy to use, easy to consume, cloud-based data protection platform combining backup, DR, archiving, and file sharing in one single easy-to-use solution. We've got more than a million endpoints connected to the grid today. An endpoint could be a laptop or a server or a mobile device, and storing 20 billion data objects in the cloud. So we're quite an established company, but in the last 12 months, we've been releasing successive waves of a new line of hybrid cloud backup appliances that we think are truly breakthrough. I'm going to walk you through what those look like using Jason's framework. So when I say a data protection platform, what do I mean? And another thing that Jason talked about, and certainly talks about in the blogcast that he referenced earlier, is that a backup appliance is only as good as the software that comes with it. Jason recently published an excellent 3-part blog post on what makes a good backup appliance, but in there he makes this point strongly, that at the end of the day, an appliance is just some on-prem hardware. What really makes it sing is the software you put on it. So here on the screen, we've got what I call the dartboard, but it's a diagram that shows you what the infrascale software can do. On the left, you've got those 4 use cases I mentioned earlier: cloud backup, disaster recovery, data archiving, file sharing. And across the top of this grid, you've got all of the different source types. So, all of the different pools where data lives, ranging from mobile devices to desktops and laptops, through your physical servers, whether it be a file server, an email server, an app server, and then through to your virtual servers. And at the bottom, you've got all of the different targets that infrascale supports. So public cloud, private cloud, or hybrid cloud deployments, which is what we're going to be focused in on here today. But the reason we call this the dartboard is the idea behind it is to truly simplify your data protection life. If you've got a data protection problem, you can throw a dart at this diagram and you'll probably hit a module that infrascale has that can solve that for you. And so when we talk about hybrid cloud, we're really talking about build solutions that leverage the latest technology, that leverage the cloud to combine the best of both worlds, right? So I could have compared other categories. On this slide, I've just got appliance-based backup and cloud-based backup. But the fundamental idea behind adopting a hybrid cloud data protection infrastructure is to avoid the sucker's choice, as we say. And when I first described this idea to my marketing team, they didn't know what the sucker's choice was. But it's a choice between 2 alternatives with the false premise that they are the only 2 options available. It's like walking into a restaurant and ordering steak and fries and then being asked, would you like your steak cold or would you like your fries cold? That's stupid. I don't want either of them to be cold. There's a third way. And that's hybrid cloud backup is really becoming the third way for data protection. Like straight to cloud backup systems, you've got a whole bunch of pros in hybrid cloud. You've got no system maintenance to worry about, or far less. You've got data mobility, ease of deployment, central management. But you've also got the pros of appliance-based backup. You can support really large data sets. You've got data sovereignty because you can control where that first copy is sitting. As Jason talked, you've got really quick recovery to make sure you hit your SLAs. And the benefit of a hybrid solution is you can leave behind the cons of each of these architectures. So straight to cloud backup's got problems with upload time and slow recovery. Appliance-based backup can get really expensive. Capacity planning is very difficult. Hardware can fail. So there's the sort of the core benefit of moving to hybrid cloud is to get the best of both worlds. So coming back to this slide, which we saw earlier as Jason was talking, there's been a lot of confusion and muddiness in the market. And I really like what Jason's done here. He's produced a new framework for us to think about purpose-built backup appliances, or as he's repositing or repositioning, data protection appliances. And a big problem in the market has been that vendors have been deliberately blurring lines, and it's been quite confusing to figure out who's doing what, right? And that very idea, that very concept that we need an analytical framework to wrap our hands around the market, it tells you something about this market, right? It is complicated. It is complex. 3 years ago, a customer asked me at an event, why can't I just have a single magic backup box that does it all? And although it was a joke, it's become something of a lightning rod here at infrascale within the walls of the company, because we now ask ourselves this question all the time. If you could build a magic backup box, what would it look like, right? And so the infrascale hybrid cloud appliances is what we've built in pursuit of that question. And so let me walk you through what we think a magic backup box would have in it using Jason's framework. So firstly, you want an on-prem appliance, right? So sort of one of Jason's core summary points is you want to use disk on-prem. So you're going to use a disk-to-disk to cloud architecture. So the first point is you want your backup provider to give you a turnkey solution. You don't want to have to cobble this together. You don't want to have to do it yourself. So it's got to be turnkey. Secondly, you need all of the local storage and compute that you're going to need to run that. Thirdly, and absolutely crucially, is you need a real enterprise backup software stack inside that appliance, right? The problems with, say, the cloud gateways of the world or the deduping storage appliances of the world is they're not a full solution. They're really just fancy disk. So you still got to go out and buy a backup software stack to run on top of those. And so the InfraScale solution comes with all the software you need, comes with all the storage you need, ranges from 4 terabytes on the low side all the way up to 200 terabytes if you need something larger. But that's not to say that there isn't some really useful stuff going on in the deduping backup appliance category for backup purposes. Now, it's important to note that you can buy deduping storage arrays for lots of reasons, right? It doesn't just have to be for backup, but it's certainly true that they commonly are purchased and used in backup. And there's two things that those types of devices, like the data domains of the world, do that's really cool for backup. First one is inline deduplication on ingest. So as data is flowing into those appliances, it can figure out which blocks it's seen before, and it's not actually going to bother to save the stuff that's duplicated. That's really cool. You can get a lot more efficiency out of your solution if you've got something like that in a backup device. So we built it right into the appliance. So the InfraScale DPAs have that inline deduplication. The other really cool thing that those deduping target arrays do is over-the-wire dedupe. So when they're replicating from box to box, they're actually passing back hashes and figuring out that, hey, I don't need to send these blocks over the wire. We do exactly the same thing. We've actually built an entire WAN acceleration engine into the InfraScale DPA as well to supercharge that connection over the WAN. And so moving on to the next category of device that often gets brought up and that Jason talked to, the cloud gateway appliances. Now, why do people use cloud gateway appliances in their backup architecture? Well, the reason is because they have this really cool, two really cool properties, we think, two things that we've gone and built into our devices. The first is this spillover. If we live in a world where there's huge cloud computing resources and I can buy it cheaply and easily and consume it, doesn't it make more sense to adopt a strategy where as I'm backing more and more data up, I'm just going to get out instead of getting myself a bigger appliance? Why would I want to mess around with replacing an appliance and copying all the data to a new one and doing a full-on forklift upgrade? It doesn't make any sense. So the cloud storage gateways have this brilliant property of cloud spillover, which we've built into our appliances too. So we can have a 5 terabyte appliance, but you can send it 50 terabytes of data because it's just going to magically spill over to the cloud and move those blocks to where they're most effectively and efficiently stored. And another cool thing about the good cloud storage gateways is they give you cloud flexibility. And that's really appropriate for your data protection strategy too. You don't want to be locked into one cloud. You want to work with your cloud, our cloud, any cloud. And that's core to everything InfraScale does, that our solutions can be used with the InfraScale cloud, major public clouds like Amazon or Azure, or any private cloud infrastructure you like. And then the last of the 4 quadrants, the failover BCDR appliances that Jason talks about, to me this is really exciting. This is the Holy Grail for backup companies. What we're talking about here is reducing your RTO to minutes, right? So you've got a hypervisor right there on the appliance. It means that if a server blows up, you can boot it and run it right there on the appliance or even up in the cloud off-site. And we're going to see how InfraScale does that in a couple of slides. So when I bring it all together, this is what I get. I get an InfraScale hybrid data protection appliance in the middle. On the left, I can protect my physical servers, my virtual servers, a whole raft of native applications, my desktops and laptops and workstations, and even my smartphones and tablets, right? Most appliances are no good for backing up laptops and no good for backing up mobile devices. But when you have a hybrid cloud, a cloud-native appliance, it can figure that out, and you can back up your workstations and your desktops. With this one solution, I've got my 4 use cases across the top. In the box, I've got the hardware I need, the backup and recovery software I need. I've got the cloud spillover technology and InfraScale's proprietary cloud boot technology. And at the bottom, I've got my built-in deduplication and simple single pane of glass management. And that's what we think a modern data protection solution looks like. One of my favorite quotes from what Jason said earlier is, when you modernize production, you've got to modernize protection. And the entire IT industry has been modernizing production over the last few years, particularly with the rise of virtualization. Everything's becoming virtualized. So now is a really opportune time to modernize your protection. And this is what a modern data protection framework looks like. And so before I wind up, let me just tell you a little bit about our Cloud Boot offering, because to me this really is the sort of, as I said earlier, the Holy Grail of data protection. The idea that, well, let's look at the diagram. So traditional situation, my users are interacting with various applications, maybe they're using SharePoint or an HR application. All of those servers, so those apps live on servers. Those servers are being backed up to a local backup device, and then in this scenario they're being replicated to the cloud. So this is the picture Jason painted as you should be using a disk to cloud model. But let's walk through what happens if you have a failure here. If you've had a full site failure, then you need to go to a second location, suck down all your data from the cloud, because in a full site failure that local appliance is gone, and then recover all the data off the appliance back to original servers. So that's a multi-day situation, right, if you've had a true site level disaster. And that's why historically medium-sized businesses and medium-sized enterprises simply haven't been able to afford true disaster recovery, because to have a shadow infrastructure was just way too expensive. Now, imagine a world where in this scenario, right, a full site disaster, the building literally burns down and the backup appliance literally goes with it. Imagine if you could log into a cloud-based dashboard, navigate to that location, so, the LA office, find the servers that you need, literally click a play button next to them and have them come up and be running in minutes. Then you connect to a VPN and boom, your infrastructure is back online and you can do the whole thing in under 15 minutes. That's what InfraScale is doing with that Cloud Boot technology, and it's really cutting edge stuff. It dramatically simplifies and dramatically reduces the time to get your business back up and running. And so we believe that disaster recovery as a service is really the future for backup appliance-based technologies. And if I was going to, if we think back to that diagram I had earlier, based on Jason's diagram as to like where is the future of the market, I think it's absolutely going toward disaster recovery as a service, because that ability to immediately restore and spin up and run that infrastructure in minutes, or in other words, have a full disaster recovery solution, but for the price of a backup solution, that totally changes the dynamics in the market here. Jason, you got anything to add on that thought?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's think about this. So two things. One, the short answer, exactly building off what you said. I tell a lot of people that whoever I can get to listen, why BAS when you can DRAS? Why would you just back up to the cloud if the only thing you can do is suck the data back down? Instead, the whole idea is, not only do you have your storage in the cloud, but if you just throw some compute and some orchestration and some automation behind that, all of a sudden now you have DR. So why BAS when you can DRAS? The other thing just to kind of think about is look, the whole idea of backup and the continuum. So I've been in data protection specifically for 25 years, but the whole idea is shrinking the time of outage. Period. That's it. So 25 years ago it was tape, and so you measured downtime and you measured data loss in days. 15 years ago it was disk, and even then it was you measured downtime and recovery time in hours. The only thing we've really done, and now today, you talk about minutes, right? The only thing the whole journey for the last, quarter century when it comes to IT and data protection is really just about how you shrink that window. And so so what makes DR inevitable for the future is that if your primary goal is reducing lost data and then ensuring as near zero as is economically viable for a recovery window, then backup alone is going to cease to be enough. It has to be a backup plus replication with a failover type component. It's all just the natural next step in maturation for shrinking that window beyond what a backup and restore behavior alone would entail.
Right. And so if there's one thing that audience members take away from today's webinar is really be thinking about DRAS, disaster recovery as a service, as you're evaluating your data protection sort of infrastructure. The cloud can do a lot of things, and up until this point in the backup industry, cloud's mainly been about cost reduction. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But with failover appliances and with technology like InfraScale's Cloud Boot, Now we're actually achieving an outcome that was technologically impossible previously. We're using the cloud to build brand new things, and that's really exciting. So make sure DR as a service or failover appliances are on your shopping list as you're going out to figure out what you're going to buy when you do your next refresh. And so speaking of buying, this is my penultimate slide, but the real point I want to make here is this, that at InfraScale, we're not just about trying to build breakthrough technology, right? We are trying to answer that question of what would a magic backup box look like, but at the same time, we want to create breakthrough value. And being cloud first and cloud native allows us to do things at a far lower cost structure and far more effectively than our traditional competitors. So today you've Does that make sense? Good, we've got some more questions coming in. Again, remember we're giving away that Kindle, so do go ahead and ask some questions. All right, we've got another question here. How does InfraScale overcome the traditional slowness of direct-to-cloud replication? Great question. So one of the things I didn't get to in today's slide deck was our WAN acceleration engine. So I touched on it briefly when I was talking about deduplicating target appliances. What those types of devices are really good at doing is sort of determining which blocks of data have been seen before and only storing them locally, but crucially, only sending them over the WAN as well. And WAN accelerators would do the same thing. So you drop a WAN accelerator, as the first device on the edge of your network behind your connection to the public internet. And it is then sort of doing inline deduplication on that stream, talking to a sister appliance in your other location. Well, we looked at that technology and figured that it was actually not too far afield from our own patented deduplication engine, right? So we extended that and then built in a bunch of network protocol optimization to collapse the chattiness of most typical protocols being used and packaged that whole WAN acceleration engine right into the appliance. So if you remember one thing about InfraScale, it's that we're converging and hybridizing a whole bunch of different technologies that haven't been combined before to make for a more awesome backup appliance, right? And that extends to really maximizing the throughput on that WAN connection. Okay, got a question here from Linda. Will the slide deck be available? Linda, most of the slide deck will be available. There's a couple of data slides from ESG that we can't republish, but some of the slide deck will, and the video, of course, the full video of today's webinar presentation will be emailed to you, I think, within 24 hours. Okay, so got lots more questions coming on here. So Fong says, virtualized application is the temporary work environment while the server is being restored. Yes, Fong. So, in sort of one of these failover scenarios, the typical approach, right, the old school approach Jason was just talking about, it used to take days or hours, was you would get a new piece of infrastructure. Now, oftentimes these days that would actually just be, a virtual server host, and then you would sort of set up a new machine, and then you would stream all that data from your backup device back to that new machine and then run it, and that can take a long time. The idea behind failover appliances is that all of that work is done for you by the appliance or by the cloud, and that server is sitting there ready to go. So when you hit a play button, it's already been virtualized, it's already been transformed, and now it's running. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, where are we up to? Okay, Linda asks, can resellers use some of the slides in our marketing efforts? Absolutely, Linda, and if you're a partner of ours, I recommend you find the Partner Resource Center within your partner dashboard, and there's a whole lot of different marketing materials in there, including, the version of this deck that we publish will be in there also. Mark writes, you mentioned that you can use various public clouds with your product. Does InfraScale have its own cloud storage? Absolutely, Mark. So when we talk about that, we say that our technology works with your cloud, our cloud, or any cloud. By our cloud in that sentence, we're talking about the InfraScale cloud server. So we do have a pre-integrated, sort of fully baked cloud storage offering that you can buy along with the software stack, or you can opt to use it with other third-party public clouds or your own private cloud environment. All right. Morris writes, are these tools available as a monthly OpEx items for InfraScale to MSPs? Yeah, Morris, they are. So you should call in and talk to one of our partner specialists if you'd like to get a demo or get more information about our partner programs. Robert writes, isn't true that the basis for this entire approach is based on on-premise compute. Total in-cloud compute, say at Azure, would negate the hybrid approach and requires only logical user data backup. Robert, yes and no. That's probably, it's beyond the scope of what we're going to get into now. The problem with just user data backup is unless you're dealing with really standardized images, so maybe you've got a gold master for all your laptops and it's completely standardized, then that way, yes, you could spin up, say, a version of that standard disk image in, say, Azure, and then you could load in the user data. For servers, that nearly never works because the local configuration is super important, and it's just not that standardized. So it's the most recommended way to sort of pursue DRAS or DRAS is to be taking bare metal snapshots if you're original source servers, or doing hypervisor level snapshots if you're running on VMware or Hyper-V, rather than just moving the user data around.
Hey, Ken?
Yep.
Can I pile on for that one? Because, I
Please.
get that every once in a while, too. We see more and more, and when we talk about failover as a goal, it often comes up, just like the gentleman who asked the question earlier, well, Azure's got compute already in it. Why would you still need that? And in a broader sense, the question really is, why do you need backup at all if you have replication? Is arguably a different way to say that. If you already have my data replicating someplace else, do I need backup? And the answer is absolutely yes. So think about it this way. Statistically speaking, failover is not going to be your primary mode of recovery. And so if the only thing you're trying to solve for is I'm going to have my user data someplace else and then siphon that back off again, that doesn't prepare you for what statistically is going to be a majority of your recovery behavior. The majority of the recovery behavior is either going to be errant user data that has to be restored, reverting a patch, reverting an application, representing data to a different set of users. If the only thing you've done is it's kind of like having fix-a-flat for a flat tire, which is great if you have a small puncture wound. That's what it's built for. If you actually have a slit down the side of your tire, if you have a valve that's broken, that doesn't actually solve the problem. And so just fundamentally speaking, what you really need to think about, the reason we talk about hybrid from a disk to cloud is because the variety of crises that you have to solve for can't be solved for with a single architecture. You need to have multiple survivable copies of data, including multiple iterations of that data. Otherwise, you're not going to have the agility the business demands.
Got it. Great. And we've got another question here. I'm not sure if this is to Jason or to me, but the question is, how does the InfraScale offering map to ESG's broader DP coverage? Jason, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so, when we talk about, so the four quadrants of data protection that appliances we talked about earlier, that's one lens to kind of just think about, what kind of appliance are you looking at. And as one of the things that, Ken, I thought you did a great job of talking about how, those black lines are going to get gray and the gray lines are going to get fuzzy as the market continues to evolve. What you showed in InfraScale's offering from, it has some inline dedupe, it has some cloud spillover, it has some failover. It makes it so it's harder to put that in a bucket. What I would tell you is that if you just think more broadly about data protection as a strategy, okay, so in the larger sense of things, we tell IT decision makers all day long that when you think about data protection, you should be thinking about it like a spectrum, right? So in my spectrum, if you look up Buffington and data protection spectrum on the blog, on the web, you'll find a blog series on it, a little podcast as well. And I think backup is red in that spectrum of activities as far as a color choice goes. And the other colors are snapshots and replication and archiving and availability and BCDR. Data protection is a spectrum. And so what I would offer to you is just like, when was the last time you saw a rainbow that didn't have green or blue? You should be thinking about data protection as a spectrum or continuum, a range of behaviors. Now, that being said, you absolutely cannot afford to go buy 7 different point solutions, one for each color. And oh, by the way, Just in the backup category, a different solution for laptops than what you protect for Robo, than what you protect for VMs, and what you protect for physical servers, you won't get it done. And so what you really ought to be thinking about, and one of the things that I was excited to partner with InfraScale today, is that when you really think about it, what you're looking for is a range of data protection agility without necessarily a myriad of disparate data protection tools to get you there. And so when we start looking at backup plus replication that includes failover, that includes dedupe, it actually maps really nicely with what the kind of guidance that we're giving to organizations of all sizes.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and that point you just made, Jason, about sort of not, you can't have it all. I think there is a new sort of breed of modern data protection companies coming up. We're not the only one, but they're cloud first, they're cloud oriented, and the old guard of data protection, I'm talking like the EMCs and semantics of the world, to cover this map that I put back up here on screen, what I called the dartboard earlier, to cover this, that sell you 3 or 4 different point solutions. And if sort of one of the amazing things about cloud, one of the really cool things for backup professionals, is you've got the opportunity now to rationalize your tool set and diminish the complexity in your data protection stack, get a single solution that can handle desktops and laptops, physical servers and virtual servers, and not need to have 3 or 4. And for the companies that are using the cloud and the companies that are built on the cloud, I think you're going to see a lot more of this with people, with companies like InfraScale innovating and coming up with true solutions that solve all of these problems for you. Well, not all these problems, but a lot of these problems for you in a single solution. Excellent. All right. Well, so we've run out of time. We've still got questions on the line that we didn't get to, but we'll follow up with each of you by email if we didn't actually get to your question during the webinar. Sorry about that. We had a lot more content than we originally planned, so we didn't have as much time for Q&A. But again, I just want to thank Jason for today. Great webinar. Jason, any closing thoughts or comments from you?
Actually, my closing thought, it was the first words and last words in my book. Get your data out of the building, because bad stuff happens. Do that so at least you have the ability to survive whatever happens. But backup alone is not enough. Final words, get your data out of the building.
I can't think of more appropriate words to end the webinar on. So, thanks for your time, and thanks for your time, everybody in the audience, and have a great day.